Yeah, good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be here in Seoul, and especially in this forum. I know that this forum is one of the most important forums for design in the world, and I'm happy that I can contribute to it today together with you. I'd like to share some thoughts, some fundamental thoughts about the beginning of design and about a success factor of design. And so I lead you from the past into the future with this little presentation. I called it the simplicity, the power of design. You know, last week I had a discussion with a British historian, and he said to me, Peter, everything is design. Design started already 2,000 years ago. People, whatever a human being does is design. I said, yeah, maybe we can have a look at this, but then everything is creativity, and at the same time, if everything is design, we can make the opposite. We can say nothing is design. You know, so we have to define in a way what design is all about. And yes, if we think that just doing or just creating something is already design, fine. But design as a profession started with the industrialization. So this is my understanding, and this is also our REDDOT understanding of design. So with the industrialization, but not in the very first phase of industrialization, in this second phase, which we call historism, when we had the assembly line, when we had watercraft, and very important, when we had electricity. So during this time, design started, and then it developed in the modern world, in the Industry 3.0, up to today's world, Industry 4.0, and now we are talking about a digital design. Now we are talking about robotics in design and things like this. But I want to go back to the beginning, where are the roots of modernity. And this is interesting. These are the roots of modernity. You know, I go back to a period of time when Europe was almost ruled by emperors and kings. And they liked buildings like this. And this building was made almost in the same year when the steam machine was invented. So it's interesting that the Baroque time is the cradle of the industrialization and is the cradle of design. This one is, I think everybody who visits Germany from Asia likes to see that. Honestly, I must say I've never been there, so I just can share the picture with you. But yeah, this is the period of our development where the first ideas of new architecture and new design came up. The Baroque was a very interesting period of time because we had a very strong scientific movement in the Baroque. We had the foundation of many scientific societies, and so there was a huge interest in a different kind of interpreting the world during this time. And this led finally as well to inventions like the steam machine and electricity and things like this. These were those kind of furniture. And I know that also here in Korea, many people still like this kind of furniture today. I come from China, and in China it's even more attractive to have this kind of furniture. In the Victorian age, we have similar kind of furniture. So these chairs, of course, are not, from my understanding, are not design chairs. These chairs are handicraft chairs. These chairs were made by craftsmanship, by the skills of a single person. Also, these cabinets, you know. So this is the beginning. But then suddenly everything changed. A new material came up. This was the material of steel. And to make constructions like this, and you see this is from 1779. It's almost the same time when we had these Baroque buildings, these big castles. But this is totally new style, a new approach of aesthetics. And it is owned to the new material, steel. And to make this kind of construction, you need not just a new material, you need also a new knowledge. You need the knowledge of static, you know? And even if the architect now says, oh, I like to have it like this, or more ornaments like this, if the mathematician, the static expert, says, impossible, it will break down, it will collapse, then the aesthetic has to follow mathematics. And this is the very beginning of simplicity in architecture and design. Because we calculate the form, we calculate the shape, you know. And this was a really fantastic and incredible building at that time. But even more, the Crystal Palace in 1851 was an outstanding building that shows us the real power of simplicity in design. You know, the British family, the king's family, they wanted to show to the world the power of their, you know, industrial skills and everything, so they hosted the first world exhibition, the great exhibition of all nations. But for this, they needed a very special building. And they did a tender among all the architects at that time, and they said, hey, bring us some nice futuristic ideas for this kind of building. And finally, nobody was able to bring the right concept. At the end, there was a gardener who came up with an idea of the Crystal Palace. Why a gardener? Because the gardener had already taken some experience from his greenhouse. You know, greenhouse was built out of metal construction and glass. And this is just the same principle. So the gardener worked together with an engineer, and they both together put on this concept of the Crystal Palace. This is one of the most extraordinary buildings in the history of architecture. But now, unfortunately, this building is almost forgotten because the architects don't like it. For sure, because there was not an architect involved. It was just engineers and a gardener. You know, so that makes a big difference. I give you another example, and this is very well known and still existing, is the Eiffel Tower. And it's, again, the design of the Eiffel Tower was not made by an architect or an artist. It was made by an engineering office of Mr. Eiffel. And they had some problems to convince the public, and that's why Mr. Eiffel asked an artist, and he asked him to help him to make this shape a little bit more artistic. So I show you the artist. This bow is just artistic, has no function, no functionality. But Mr. Eiffel asked this artist to add this to make the concept, the proposal, more acceptable. For the Eiffel Tower itself, the whole steel construction is already based on static. And there was a very strong movement at that time for this kind of functional buildings, very simple buildings. In Germany, we have I would say, multi-creative talent, Mr. Peter Behrens. He was not an architect, he was not an artist, but he was everything. And he started also a new kind of architecture for the industry. He said, if industry becomes very much important to us, then we have to focus on industrial buildings, not any longer just castles, but industrial buildings. And this was a brand new idea. Why should we spend so much money for a cozy industrial building, make it more enjoyable for the workers? But Peter Behrens said, if this is the future, then we have to invest into this. And so he started to make his buildings by using steel and a lot of glass. This is Peter Behrens. He was the director as well from the very famous company AEG, the design director. And this is one of his most famous factory buildings, a turbine factory next to Hanover. And so he tried to use the glass to bring a lot of daylight into these factories to make the work during the day a little bit more convenient for the workers. These are some products that he did for REG at that time, and he was already very wise. You know, Mr. Rathenau, the owner of AEG, he said, hey, why do we name this product after you? And he said, no, I'm just a creator. They didn't use the word designer at that time. It was not existing. He said, I'm the form giver. I gave the form to this. But I do not want to give my name because the name has to come from the company. I did it for the company. So this was very, very clever, already very wise in thinking. So we can say Peter Behrens was the first design manager of a company. So he did this kind of things. But as always, if there is some modern things, you always have the opposite. And Mr. William Morris, this guy, British guy, he was really upset about this new modernism. He said, I feel like I'm living in his enemy's country, surrounded by all this miserable, ugly things. And he was really asking the people, don't buy the new products, don't buy all this shit. And so he was really mad about this. And he was the founder of an organization. Later it came out that this was the roots for the arts and craft movement. But he was really against all these things that happen. And he loved, for example, ornaments like this. So he made a lot of wallpapers and things like this. So he was against all this modernism and all this kind of modern simplicity. At the same time, there was a little entrepreneur, a craftsman named Michael Tonnet. And he saw, at the same time, he saw a big chance in these new possibilities of production. And he came up with a new kind of chair. Compared to the historicism chair, which was handmade furniture, his chair looked very simple. Very simple, no ornaments, yeah, straight up. And this chair was made just out of 6 parts and 10 screws. That's all. And it could be manufactured with machines. So it was very cheap as well. And the good thing was it could be assembled by the buyers themselves. So it was a very early IKEA concept that he had. Yeah? So, and he shipped the chairs, for example, in a box like this. He could put 36 Tonnet chairs in one box of 1 cubic meter. And until today, this chair is the most successful chair. It is still in the market. And there is no other chair which was sold more than this one. So for him, he established a totally new business by understanding the new process of production and the new aesthetic of the new age, the aesthetic of simplicity. And if you look at this, you know, we have a little similarity to the Baroque chairs, but he made it simpler, and in '61, IKEA made it even more simple. So you can see that this principle of simplicity is still lasting into our nowadays. And I will give you more examples of IKEA. IKEA is a real talented company to use simplicity for their businesses. Here's another example from the British side. We have an historical chair, and then Mr. Mackintosh, a British designer, he developed the Willow chair too in 1903. And in 2001, IKEA came up with this coastby. And you see, there's a lot of similarity, but it is even more simpler. So if we look at this development from the Tonnet chair over the Mackintosh chair, and then we have the Leggera, this is a very astonishing chair. You cannot see it on this picture, but you can lift the chair with your little finger. It is like air. It's so light like air. So very, very simple. Very reduced to the max. And the play chair from Jesper Morrison is also very, very simple made. And it is not any longer in the market. I don't know why. Maybe it was too successful or not. Or maybe it was too simple. It might be. We have the same development with bookshelves. We have here one from 1898 from Mr. Riemerschmidt. And this is the most successful, simple bookshelf in the world, is the Billy bookshelf from IKEA, made in '97, and it's still in the market today. So you see, you can follow the line. Aesthetically, the simplicity tries to build a bridge between the historical ideas and the modern, but then we have the trend to go more and more simple, simple, simple to make to create a new aesthetic. So this is the moment where we have to ask ourselves, what is really the difference between design and not design? And I give you an example from cutlery. You know, this is something that we call design because the cutlery is made in an industrial process. Yeah, it's an industrialized process, and later it comes out to this design of Peter Rake. If we compare it with craftsmanship, craftsmanship is all handmade. On the left side, you can see this is all handmade. And if we look at art, is handmade and a little bit more crazy, let's say, more crazy. So here we have the differentiation between craftsmanship, art, and modern design, which is very simple. Design had to be very simple. You know why? Because a machine has not the skills of a craftsman. So the machine could not bring ornaments into the play. So the machine had to be very direct, and if we're talking about serial production, you know, it should have been the simplest production possible at that time. This was the reason. So it was really a functional reason to create simple products. And this was also the reason for Mr. Tonnet. And here another example, we have the design chair, we have the craftsmanship chair, and we have this chair from Stefan Wiwerka. You cannot even sit on it. So this is an idea of a chair, so let's say it's art. Nothing against art, nothing against craftsmanship, but I just want to explain to you the meaning of design. So, as I mentioned before, architects and artists, they did not like this period of time when simplicity was created just out of functionality and made by engineers, made by non-aesthetic people. So at that time, they were not very amused. But then, finally, the Bauhaus brought it into the fine salons. So they created a new approach of simplicity, and from this time on, simplicity became a real aesthetical principle of design. Because now it were artists, now architects, and all the, you know, the professional people of creativity business, they started to make simple products, and now it was accepted. Yeah. And also we had different approaches. And this is the most simplest chair you can find. And I have it myself. It's really at the edge between art and design. But it doesn't look very comfortable, but I have to say it's very comfortable. It is really a comfortable chair. You can sit several hours in it. So this is the highest end of simplicity in this world. But simplicity just did not have just a meaning for chairs. After the Second World War, simplicity was discovered by some other companies. One company was the company of Braun. And this, Mr. Rams, is the chief design officer of Braun, and he once said, "Good design is as little design as possible. Less, but better. Back to purity, back to simplicity." And this was his approach to make the things much, much simpler. This shaver is a landmark in design, and I remember my father was just a simple worker, and he used this brown shaver, and he gave me a kind of lecture when I was a little boy of 4 or 5. He gave me a lecture of good design by just explaining the shape of this shaver, because the shaver is in your hand like a fantastic, like a pebble, and it makes really fun to make use out of it. The function is super, the usability is outstanding, and the aesthetical appearance as well. So this was one of the major products of that time. But you can see that even a company like Apple was inspired by this kind of simple approach or simplicity approach of the company Braun. And Jonathan Ive, he himself says that he really admires the approach of Dieter Rams at that time, so that he really is a follower of Dieter Rams. It's not by accident that we have this kind of similarities between the iPod and the Braun transistor radio from 1957, or between this calculator from 1977, and if you used your iPhone calculator, it's very close to that. If you see, this is it is not a copy. It is learning from each other. You know, it's developing. It goes further into a much better, higher level of simplicity, what Apple does. Or this, on the left side, we have a loudspeaker from Braun from 1959, and if you look to the aesthetics of the Apple iMac that Jonathan Ive did in 2007, and all the following iMacs, you see there is a lot of similarity of simplicity. So I can recommend to you the book that Jonathan Ive did on all his Apple products, because this is a real statement of how to produce really high-end simple products. And this is one page out of the book. So he made photographs of each single product just for this book. He's crazy. But if you go through this book, it is really a manifestum of high-end design and the power of simplicity. Yeah? So it's incredible. We can say that in this way, Braun and Apple use simplicity. They use it already in a more symbolic form. Because if we take our iPhone out of our pockets, we show, hey, we are design-minded. We know about something about design. At that time in the 50s and 60s, if people had the Braun products in their houses, they show, hey, we are modern people. We know about design. We know about the futuristic style. So it turns from an aesthetic category into a symbolic. So it has another symbolic level. So it symbolizes that you know that design is something very special. You create simplicity, and if you share the simplicity in the knowledge with others, then you symbolically say, hey, we are one community and understanding design in the right way. And by the way, this is a big, big difference in the historical development between the Western people and the Eastern people. Because what I'm talking about here is all the Western history, is industrialization from the Western society. So the Western society had over 100 and 200 years time to understand the symbolic level of design. In the Eastern world, people don't have so much time. So it's still a process of understanding what the difference is between just design or art or handicraft things. So this is a process of learning. And so as far as I can see and as far as I know from REDDOT Design Award, from the results, that Korea, Taiwan, China, all these countries, they are closing up because they are starting now to understand this kind of values of design by their own experience. So nowadays, simplicity also turned to a universal principle. What does that mean? Simplicity became also a kind of a business concept. This is a Lego brick from 1994. which was too simple because it was not fixing enough. So they had to change it, and they had to create these circles inside. And since 1958, this is a perfect toy. And it is the simplest thing that you can imagine. But out of this, they created different kind of possibilities, and they make a lot of money. You know, if you look at the numbers, we are talking about 4.8 billion euro turnover in 2015. So simplicity also can lead your business into a very success zone. So all these companies, they create simple things, and their CEOs talk about it. Let's look at Eric Avar. He is the creative director and vice president of innovation of Nike, and he said, "A good designer is always looking for a solution. You are trying to cut through the simplicity and purity of what problem you are trying to solve." And if we look at the numbers of Nike, you see, simplicity makes a real business success. It's all in million US dollars. This is a German guy. He established a new bicycle company a couple of years ago, and the company Canyon, you can buy them in the internet, is a very interesting and simple new concept. And he said, good design is extremely important to us. Our products must be aesthetically appealing and timeless. The following design guideline applies to us: simple, precise, dynamic. And also, if you look at this company, how they developed within 10 years, it's an incredible development of business as well. And this gentleman, I already showed you some products of him, and he said, simplicity in our behavior gives us strength. Simplicity should characterize planning and strategic direction. So IKEA is based also on simplicity. And the numbers show the success of the company. So we can say that simplicity as this kind of approach is not just aesthetically and not just functional or symbolic, but it's also a business approach. Or if we look at Tupperware, Tupperware is a very simple approach of conserving products, and also is the simplicity at its end. And also this company performs super good. And another person, Mr. Dyson. This is interesting. Mr. Dyson, he hates the symbolic form. He wants to give us only the natural form of simplicity. But if you look at this, this is very symbolic as well, because this is also stylish a little bit. Yeah, he could have made it maybe even simpler, but not aesthetically like that. So he is really a master of creating very aesthetic, simple things. And he is also a master of making good profits and making good business. And a company that he established himself on his own ideas, and the basic principle of his designs is simplicity. Of course, Steve Jobs, we have to quote here, and he said, "The way we are running the company, the product design and the advertising, it all comes down to this. Let's make it simple, really simple." And I gave you already some examples of that. And these numbers are old, from 15, but I have the new ones. Now they crashed the 1 trillion, and the company is doing so well. And I think there is no other company in the world which is more simple and makes, in a more simpler way, the money than Apple. So let's see why simplicity is so powerful. Again, Apple as a model. You know, if it comes to laptops, they have 3 models and 9 technical specifications. Very, very simple, reduced. If we now look to a competitor, and I cannot tell you the name of the competitor because this competitor also wins red dots. So please understand this. But it's a very, very well-known company, a worldwide renowned company. And the competitor, they have 9 different models, and 125 technical specifications. That makes it very complicated. Also, in your daily business, you have to make your product catalogs, you have to train your dealers, everything. It's very complicated. In the Apple case, it's very simple. Even a child could easily learn the principle of it. Another example, if it comes to the iPhones, 5 different models and 17 technical specifications. Very, very simple. Yeah, it's not that much. And another competitor has 7 different models, yes, but 30 technical specifications, and that makes it more complicated. As Steve Jobs said, if something is too complicated, I just want to buy it. And I can remember that I never bought me a BlackBerry because the BlackBerry was much too complicated for my fingers. I could not understand this kind of smartphone. And I think till today we have a kind of illness, we call it the BlackBerry thumb, because you always have to hold your fingers very strange when you try to make a message. So this was something that Steve Jobs observed, that something was wrong with the keyboard. And Apple came with a multi-touch display and revolutionized in a very simple way this problem. So we have, with the Palm or with the BlackBerry and other smartphones at that time, we have the keyboard fixed in plastic, which was very complicated to make a use out of it. And Apple came with this multi-purpose surface, and it makes it very simple for people in any generation, for young kids as well as for older people who cannot see the product anymore so good. But we have in other life areas, we have simplicity as a very functional phenomenon. I show you 2 stalls, one from Alvar Aalto from 1933, which is stapleable and is one of the very successful stalls until today. And then here, on the right side, you find the Ulm stall. When the Ulm School of Design was built after the Second World War in Ulm, they were very low on budget. And they did not have even the money for tables and for equipment. So Max Bill, the director of this school, came up with the idea of this stall. And he gave one to each student. And you can see, maybe I can use it. And you can see, if you use it, if you turn it around, you can use it as for carrying your books or carrying your items. And then also you can use it as a chair, as a table. And if you turn it around, like here, you have a store. You can sit on it. So that makes the whole furniture of the Ulm School in the beginning very simple. It cannot be simpler than that. Okay. But simplicity is also very aesthetically, as I mentioned before. I give you this example of this coffee pots. It can have different shapes, and we immediately like it. And it is easy to use. Yeah. I like the Pavoni machine on the right side, and I have it myself. But I must tell you, I've never been able to make a good espresso with this machine. You can see this machine is very, very complicated. And also at the final moment, the cleaning process is also very complicated. It looks fantastic, yeah, but if you want to make an espresso, I would prefer this machine or any other machine. You just push the button and the machine does the rest. This is simplicity in our daily life. It's very important. So now to summarize, I like to remind you, so we have 4 stadiums or 4 qualities of simplicity. So there is the first quality as a functional form, which I show to you with these bridges and with the Crystal Palace. This was just functional, and as I mentioned, this kind of forms were invented by engineers and by experts for static constructions. So it's based on that. It's not based on any aesthetic idea. And then we have the second period, is simplicity as a style-creating form. Now, simplicity turns into an aesthetical form, and this is a perfect example for this. Now, simplicity is accepted in the art world and in the fine design world, as this shows. Then the next step was simplicity as a symbolic form. So symbolic form shows to us that we understand the principle of simplicity as an aesthetic principle, and that we understand the message of this, and then we can use the simplicity to show that we are part of a community. We are part of a community. And nowadays, we have this crazy thing with the Apple community. I mean, it's so crazy that people stand overnight to wait that the shop opens and they can buy the first iPhone, the first new iPhone. Hey, what is that? They have never seen it before. They just trust the brand. And this is because of the symbolic power of this kind of products. And the symbolic power makes it also predictable. You know, if we would use the Baroque aesthetic was always unpredictable because the commissioners always expected something new, something unknown. So they always tried to encourage the handicraft people, make me something outstanding. This is the way the old emperors and kings wanted to show their power and their mightiness and so. But in our days, if we trust a company and we want to buy a product that we haven't seen before, it needs to be predictable. Otherwise, we don't know whether we like this aesthetic or not. So as more predictable as possible saves your success in the business. But how to make things in the easiest way predictable? Make them as simple as possible. You know, then there is no space for mistakes. You know, if you start ornamentic, then you never know who likes this or who doesn't like it. But if it goes to simple and everybody understands the message of simplicity, then it's very easy to make predictable things. So finally, I try to show you the universal system of simplicity, the universal form. That means connect simplicity with a business idea. Yeah? You know, I remember the mayor said that he is a social designer as a mayor. So if we now would give him a good idea how he could make his job better, so he should be a social designer who makes the things as simple as possible for everybody in this city. Make the city so simple to use, make the city simple to experience. And this is also, I'm in the consultancy team of the city of Seoul, this is always what we also tell the mayor, that simplicity is a key to success, also for cities. Yeah, and I showed you some examples how to be successful with simplicity. So, coming to the end, we have to say simplicity is less but better. And I can show you the development. On the left side, you see the van that Peter Behrens did, and at that time, this was the simplest version of a van. And then Mr. Dyson came in 2010 and made this completely new version of simplicity. And that makes him so successful. Ending with a quote of this very wise gentleman, Mr. Einstein. He said, "Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler." Thank you very much.